wife asks what hat I'm wearing that day, because it is, some days it's a little bit difficult to decide what you are really talking about in relationship to water quality, whether you're talking to farmers, whether you're talking to someone in the city. All of these things all come down to agriculture, though. And I think that's the key for us here today. We're here to learn. And as a former community college and university instructor, the first part of this presentation is probably going to be a little bit like the soils class you had. So how many had a soils class in college? Okay, so anybody that wants to add anything or do any corrections, that's okay. But I want to bring up one thing. We have no loyalty here today. Now, if you have loyalties, and I know you're wearing a Helena shirt, you're going to have to give us other than Helena ideas. Because I do know this, because I did observe that Pioneer must be in kind of financial difficulty, because Steve was eating candy out of the DeKalb bucket over here. Yeah, I know. That's the only thing you're getting free out of DeKalb. But right now, I'll tell you right now. So everybody else, we just got to know who our friends are here. So make sure you look around and check out who each person is, because. Yeah, you're excused. His son was a good student. I know must have been took after his mother. But anyway, we're gonna get started here and talking about phosphorus management. You know, most of us don't think much about phosphorus in soybeans. We usually think about phosphorus when we're going to raise corn or wheat. You always got to pump up the phosphorus for your wheat production and add some sulfur in there. But phosphorus is soybeans. But I'm going to show you today, after our basic soils lesson, that what we're going to get into, what's the role of phosphorus? How can we use it to maximize yields? How do we manage phosphorus from a nutrient management planning portion? And finally, but not last, what about keeping phosphorus on the land and keeping phosphorus out of the water? And that, if you look at that real closely, you say, well, that's got to be something to do with all this regulation that's proposed for us. Now, we're not regulated yet, and so it's a voluntary program. So we're going to talk about phosphorus at the very last, but I got some take-home messages on that. When you look at this particular slide, you see two stars. The first one is where we're at here in Effingham, and the other star is basically where I farm. I wish I farmed that much of the Panhandle, to be honest with you. But for all of you that know where I farm, you say, why did he say the Panhandle? Melvin, we know why we want to be up in the Panhandle instead of those guys beside you, right? Yeah. Yes, that's right. Okay, because once you get through the mid part of Montgomery County, you're talking about the terminal moraine. And it's running across basically Route 16. But if you look at this map, we're talking about high, medium, and low supplying areas for phosphorus. The soils, and basically not only the types of clay, or the amount of clay, but the type of clay that's present. How many are in the high area? Anybody in the high? We've only had a couple so far. You are. Where are you from, sir?
Greene County, Greenfield.
Greenfield, okay. Yep. Just kind of cuts through there, doesn't it? Just catches you. Okay. Anybody from the medium area? Okay, that's about half the group. And the rest of us come from where? Yes, I could get that deep voice of all you. But if you look at it, it's not just in southern Illinois, it's in northern Illinois as well. So we're talking about clay then that's making the difference for us. When we talk about those clays, we talk about the values of phosphorus in the soil and how much in the soil testing areas. For example, in a soil testing area, in a low supplying area, you ought to have at least a 45. That's your minimum. A medium's a 40, high's a 30, just progressive. But then your maximum is also going to be a lot higher in the low supplying area. Well, that's important because we want you to have as high as a P1 test as we can if you're in the low area. If you're in the high supplying area, you're fortunate. You're going to have a chance to make a little bit more money if you manage your phosphorus. Now, if you get that fertilizer guy that wants to put on 200 and 200 every year of DAP and potash, he's not managing your phosphorus. He's not managing the potash. He's selling you fertilizer. He may be selling you enough. He may be shortchanging you. So we'll find out how much that's going to be. There now, this is the first part of the test. When we leave here, anybody going for CCA? Credits? Okay, good. We have a test here at the end of the thing. It's only 10 questions. Basically, the first 5 is you got to fill in this. So you got that picture done? Okay? Because that's actually the phosphorus cycle. We think about the nitrogen cycle, and I'm not going to dwell on this too long. We think about the nitrogen cycle and how we manage nitrogen. Well, the phosphorus cycle is how we've got to start thinking about it as how we manage phosphorus as well. Because when we manage phosphorus, as you can see here, this came out of the fertilizer handbook. Phosphorus doesn't move around a lot. If you had nitrogen, it's going to move. It's going to move with the water. It's going to move up and down with capillary action. Potash is going to move a little bit. Potassium moves just slightly. But phosphorus doesn't move. That prill, basically right there, it's moved down basically 1 inch in 17 days. Now that's important in the long run for us, to recognize that that's very little movement is going to take place. Now, this is the other part of the test. All you got to do is be able to fill out the actual molecular makeup of the primary phosphate ion. Now the primary phosphate ion is that's what we're going to take up by the plant to provide phosphorus. And that's what the soil is going to supply to us. Okay, so you say, God, he's getting into this chemistry now. Well, it's just the understanding of why that's important. I thought I had did I pass by one? Ah, that's one I passed by. That's a little easier to understand, isn't it? Let's take a look at this one. This is that phosphorus cycle in color. Here's our corn plant. If we had beans, I'd put beans in there. But basically, here's the primary orthophosphate, secondary orthophosphate, and there's a difference between. The difference is one's a negative charge, another one's a double negative. The single negative charge is the primary, and that's the one that's most prominent in the soil under 7.2 pH. So pH now becomes a factor in here, okay? Factor in here. And we see movement back and forth from organics, would it be from manures, plant residues, humus itself. We see actual movement back and forth from clay minerals. What most of ours comes from mineral phosphorus, fertilizer that we bring into the soil we apply. Now the question is, if we could capture something from each of these, could we not eliminate but reduce our costs of application on commercial fertilizer? Well, when we get done today, I'm going to show you how you're going to be able to do that. So how much money you're going to save me? Oh, I can't say right now, but we're going to save you some money. And I'm going to do that with a product that's out there growing green on the ground that's going to make a difference. We're going to go through some factors now affecting phosphorus availability. Well, there's 2 factors, things that we cannot change at all. It's the amount of clay we have in our soil and the type of clay we have. We have 3 types of clay, basically kaolinite, illite, and montmorillonite and clay minerals. The most common one we have in the lower organic matter soils, the cation exchange capacities are lower, are the kaolinite clays. And they're great trappers. That 2 layers that make the 1-to-1 layer, that traps more of the orthophosphate than anything else. Now, I look around the room here a second. Norbert, you've got hair more than I got, but it's just about the same color, okay? You're going to fall in the same, you don't have as much hair, but it's about the same color. So between the 3 of us, how many of us remember the P2 test? Oh, you don't have hair either. That's part of it. You remember then. Okay. All right. So, and you remember what P2 was? Test 4? That was total phosphorus, wasn't it? P1 is available phosphorus. Now, when we think in terms of total phosphorus, what we have then, and the reason they recorded it goes back to the old idea that we used to apply rock phosphate. And the rock phosphate would slowly decompose. We weren't treating it. It was a natural product. It would slowly decompose, and it would provide phosphorus for our plants. How many of you CCAs are advising organic farmers at this time? How many plan to advise an organic farmer? Well, if you don't plan, nobody plans to do so, I'll advise them, because I'm going to advise them to use rock phosphate because they can't use triple super or DAP and stay organic. They've got to use something natural like rock phosphate. So that's what it is. That's legacy phosphorus is out in the soil. There's legacy phosphorus in our streams. There's legacy phosphorus in our lakes. But in our soil, there's also legacy phosphorus from way back when we put it in. The difference is it makes up the P2 test, and it's not available. But if we could capture some of that, what could we do? We could reduce our fertility rates then that we're applying and help ourselves more economically. And that's what we hope to do today, to show you how you might be able to do that. Well, there's application. Equipment, different ways to do it. How many put on their phosphorus before corn in a 2-year program? Okay. How many apply phosphorus every year for a crop? Good job, guys. Good job. I don't. Not until this year. Previously, I went ahead and applied it every 2 years. The problem we have is the availability. As soon as phosphorus hits the ground, it starts to becoming unavailable. That prill dissolves and it just becomes unavailable, slowly but surely. And it gets tied up. And the further away you are from that application time, the more tied up it's going to be. So for example, if you have the opportunity to put on phosphorus just prior to the crop, that would be to your advantage. Because it's going to be, the most is going to be available per pound at that point. So that's the direction I would like for you to start thinking about. But when we do this, one thing we want to remember is make sure that we're in a nutrient management plan prior to each application. In other words, your plan, not necessarily one that's going to be written out by TSP from NRCS, but one in which you actually make a plan how I'm going to apply, and what I'm going to apply, and when and how. And that way, we're starting to move in a direction I think that will give us greater availability and hopefully higher yields. Another factor is the amount of aeration that we have in the soil. In other words, the amount of oxygen that we have in the soil. How do we get to this point, or this perfect point, of where we have half of our soil is made up of the mineral phase, 4 or 5%, most of us in around this area is from 1 to 3 organic matter percentage. A quarter of the soil is made up of air space. The other quarter of the soil is made up of water pore space. How do we get there? Because every time we run a tillage pass, this portion becomes larger. And because we break up these pore spaces that hold the water and hold the air. So the way we get closer to making more available is to have more aeration. So therefore, anytime we reduce our tillage and go to no-till beans, in this case, we're going to become closer to this perfect soil arrangement. We're going to reduce compaction, because compaction, what? Reduces oxygen level. Back in the 1970s and 80s, more so the 80s than any other time, I ran a cultimulture right before I did my beans. Anybody have a cultimulture back in those days? You know, the best thing for a cultimulture is a lot like a moldboard plow. It's called a cutting torch. Because in reality, the moldboard plow brought about the prairies, but it also brought about the greatest amount of erosion. The cultimulture does a great job of breaking up clods that you actually created by working the soil too wet, but it also just creates no oxygen level. And if these lighter organic matter soils around here, it's almost like flour, isn't it? Some of you guys, if you ever run a cultimulture. So what we want to try to do is we want to improve the soil aggregation. In other words, that soil aggregation where we hold those soil beds together by what's being excreted by the root. That's what we're trying to do, is create aggregation, and therefore we're going to have more oxygen in the soil, better aeration, and as a result, greater availability for our phosphorus. This is an example of a soil test that I just picked out, and you'll get a chance to see one of my soil tests in a little bit. But just an example, what we're looking at here is we're looking at the P1 test. One of the things about phosphorus testing, it's 85% reliable. That's according to the the Bible for us, not nutrient management, agronomy handbook. That's it. Emerson Opsinger swears by the agronomy handbook. We need to bury him with a couple of them. I mean, no, not yet, but we really, that's his reliability. Well, and depending whether you're in Illinois or in Indiana, you're talking about pounds per acre or parts per million. Remember, there's 200 million pounds per fertile slice, so these are usually just half values. One of the things affecting as well is temperature. Temperature, the cooler the temperatures, the less phosphorus in uptake. Now, we don't see many phosphorus deficiencies in soybeans, but in corn we do see phosphorus deficiencies, don't we? What is a phosphorus deficiency in corn? Purplish leaf. Is it because we're deficient in phosphorus, or is it because the root couldn't take it up, or is it because the phosphorus was unavailable? Well, probably the phosphorus isn't readily available. The roots have not reached out to grab that phosphorus, and as a result, we show a deficiency. So temperature makes a difference. Now, starters will give us some response, will help us. We're probably not going to use starters in beans because we never usually plant beans as early as corn, do we? If you've got good drainage and you've got an SDS resistant variety, as soon as corn gets, or beans get ready to plant, I'd plant at 50 degrees. I'd run 2 rigs. I'd plant them earlier, you can. And one of the reasons some of you are finding, later season beans do better, the genetics for some of these group 2, late 2s and early 3s are getting as good as late 3s and early 4s if we plant them early. And that's going to be important later on in our discussion. That's going to be important. So anytime and I say that about SDS because I know on wet soils that's a problem. SDS, especially you get into southern Illinois. But if you've got good drainage, I think you can look for that. And also be looking for bean varieties that have good resistance to it. Next one's a pH. Notice down the very bottom here we're talking about a pH of 5.5 to 7.5. That's like trying to shoot baskets by throwing a ball into a pond and say, oh, I made a basket. That's not a basket. That's just a huge area. I want you to be right here. I want you to be at the best spot. I want you to be at what I call the sweet spot in forest pH. And that sweet spot is really in soybeans for P availability for soybeans is 6.6 to 6.7. How easy is it for you to hit that sweet spot? Pretty tough when you're applying 3 to 4 ton per acre and it's going like this in the roller coaster. But if you're looking at good limestone that's ground uniformly, that you know the reliability of that limestone to break down, I think that applying 2 ton instead of 3 or 4, but 2 ton at a time, you can get fairly close to this area right here. Sure, you may be at 6.8 or 6.9 at a time. Sometimes you're going to be down at 6.5. That's okay because we're looking at the sweet spot. It's like hitting a golf ball. You get that perfect swing and she goes 275. Well, she used to go that way before from me. Okay? Now, I'm a little bit on the heel. And getting a little bit 225 and 25 that way. It comes to 250, see? Get it a little bit on the toe and you turn her over. She kind of duck hooks about 150 yards. But you put it on that sweet spot, she's still going to get out there 250 to 275. That's where you need to be. Now, there's only one consideration that I want you to have, and that's this. I want you to consider the fact that trizenes become synergistic at pHs. Well, you say, oh, trizenes, we don't use trizenes anymore. That's old chemistry. Anybody using the atrazine still? Will you admit it? Yeah, okay, good, you're admitting it. All right, still a great product used in combination with others. I know you're using it. The TDM MDL study that they did on atrazine, there's atrazine showing up in Lake Louis-Jaeger. I think it was 2014. We saw atrazine showing up in Lake Springfield. Now we're not talking about the atrazine levels that we had in Lake Springfield back in the 90s, but I'm talking about the atrazine levels that are showing up right now because we're starting to use those atrazines. We're also using a substrate called a metribuzin, and how many are using a Syncor product anymore? Yes, if you're using a lot of our soil-applied soybean herbicides to get rid of that resistant water hemp, that is a trizine. And when we put them together, we may be causing some problems. Not so much for the bean, but for that cover crop at the end of the year, at fall. And this is the one that got me the first time. I used a product. It went on in my beans. The beans were about 6-5 trifoliate. It controlled everything, and I had it perfect. And my first equipped flyover of radishes in 40 acres, I had 4. I think there was a 5, but I couldn't tell that was a dandelion shriveling up or a radish. Excuse me. But it is a problem. So watch your pHs and watch your trizines, especially if you're going to cover crops. This slide didn't come out quite as well as I'd like for it to. Either that or my glasses are a little bad. But what I'm showing you here is even in the subsoils, we don't have to have a lot of phosphorus if it's available to get maximized yields in soybeans. And if we put on extra phosphorus, it really doesn't make that much difference. But if we get it, we've got to have it available. And that's what this slide tells us. That availability is so important if we're going to maintain it. Now, what kind of soil test values were we looking at for maintenance? I'd like to see you get on a maintenance program that fit into your APH on your crop insurance. What is your 10-year average? What is it? What is your expected yield? Not your yield goal, but your expected yield. Now, this is important to understand the difference here. In the Chesapeake, they still go on yield goals or expected yields for setting up their nutrient programs for the present crop. If they look back at what your soil test was, for your present crop, you can use expected yield. But one of the things I think you'll notice here, look how much a single bushel of P2O5 is removed with a bushel of beans. That's significant because if you look at what corn is like, it's half the amount. It's half the amount. Wheat's just a little bit more, and we have always known that wheat requires a lot of phosphorus, but soybeans do too. And how many knew that fact? Because that's an important fact to remember. And the reason why I say that is if you've got available phosphorus, then you're going to be able to get that uptake and have it happen. If you get short at the wrong time, then you're in trouble. And when we talk about timing, here's the timing. We want available phosphorus in that full bloom stage. We're still putting out some trifoliates, but we're getting end mature seed. Look at that. 70% of our phosphorus utilization occurs late in the season. Remember, in October, you put on 2 years ago your DAP, a 2-year program. Now you want a full year in the corn. Now we're already up to August, 22 months later, before we're really using the available phosphorus that we hope that we applied 22 months earlier is available to us. That's why we've got to consider going to annual applications based on the upcoming crop. But this is our salvation. Mycorrhizae fungi. This is the salvation. This is going to make the difference of capturing that unavailable phosphorus. It's an organism that's on the root. It's a symbiotic relationship between the root and the fungus itself. It colonizes on the root and provides feeders out there, stringers that go out, that reach out. If you were going to have a horror movie, one of those cheap horror movies, all you would have to do is time-lapse the growth of mycorrhizae off of a root and claim it was out there eating children or people. I'm recording this, remember? And so you've got to watch out what it is. But if you really realize what's it doing, it's reaching out, taking up some water, grabbing some phosphorus. And where's it getting it at? It is so much smaller than a root hair, it can actually go through the layers of the clay mineral and reach between those layers. A root hair is too large to reach between those, but a mycorrhizae fungi can reach between those layers and get that trapped phosphorus. How big is this? 10 feet? 10 feet away. They can get. But what's the key to using this? What's the key? Well, you got to make sure that the plant continues to carry on photosynthesis. And if it does, it's making sugars to feed that fungi. The fungi go out and feed the plant nutrients. No more tillage. We have enough phosphorus in our soil to grow a lot of crops if we can go get them with the fungi. But if you till your soil, you're stopping that fungi from growing. And the way we do that is keep something green on the ground so that fungi has an opportunity to stay alive. Now think about this just a minute. How many of you have a 5-year growth period on your farm? You got May, corn's up, beans are up, June, July, August, September, and we're in harvest in October, so it's gone. So we got a 5-month. Remember we talked about my rotations, corn, soybeans, wheat, double crop? Think about this rotation. Corn, cereal rye, soybeans, radishes and oats. Last year when I had my cereal rye green up, it started greening up really around the 1st of March, truthfully. I had a little bit of green in February, but most of it was green in 1st of March. But I had March, April, May. Beans are green now. June, July, August, September. Oh, we're starting to lose leaves. In comes the plane. We drop radishes and oats. October, November, December this year, we had 10 months of green growing crop, living root in the soil because of cover crops and our regular commodity crop. What about the mycorrhizae? They're working with all of them. They're all working. Not working half the year, but twice as long. And that's the key, a way we're going to start capturing phosphorus out of the P2 to make it more available in the P1. Now, this is something that comes to mind. I do a lot of miles. I speak at different things. I'm running all over the country. I do a lot of miles. So I do a lot of thinking. I don't necessarily listen to rock and roll or anything on the radio, but I think about things. So this is my latest thought. Do I want to have something, fungicide, fungi killed? Do I want to kill something around my seed and then ask that same root to say, I want you to reach out and grab me some phosphorus? Do I want to do that? I don't think I can. And so what I've done, and I don't know if it's true, I'm going to have to look into it, but I've actually canceled all of my treated beans. I'm going to go with untreated beans this year. What are you going to do, Dick, if it's cold as heck the second week of May? I'm going to wait till the third week of May and hope it warms up. I think it really will. I think we may be working against some things. I'm not sure. Don't take me on this, but this was on my mind. Okay. Now, one of the concerns I have for this year is what am I going to do to make money? Can I make money this year? I don't know about the rest of you, but my pencil's not very sharp right now. If you really look closely, it's not sharp. And what am I going to do to stay in compliance with nutrient loss reduction? And that's what we're going to end up in our discussion with today. I want to talk a little bit about what it's going to take to make some money, maybe on our fertility program, in the fact that, for example, if I have a expected yield of 70 bushels, and I'm going to use some DAP, and I've got about a 60, do I need to do anything as far as fertility? Yeah, I need some fertilizer for that. That's at the top of my range, but I need for this here, don't I? Could I get by without putting any fertilizer on? Maybe, but I don't want to take that chance because I need to make some money if I can. Okay, there's how much I'm going to need. P2O5, I need almost 60 pounds of P2O5. Well, here's my diammonium phosphate, 1846O. So therefore the math, and I'm not going to ask you to do it, it comes out to 130 pounds. Comes out to 130 pounds. Okay, that's how much I need to apply for my 70 bushels of beans. Now, if we know that 9 pounds of P2O5 is equal to 1 point on the test for either buildup or removal. And I think that's a fact that if we were going to take a test, that would be on the test. In other words, it's going to take about 20 pounds of DAP to raise the test 1 point. Or if we look at it another way, we can say how much it takes about 10, 11 bushels to lower the test, okay? If we put it in bushels to lower it based on the removal rate. So if we want to lower our test, and I've got some tests I need to lower right here, I need to produce 10 bushel or 70 bushel yield. We'll lower the test about 1 point if I didn't apply anything. And there's an example. This is for me. This was taken this spring from Ingram Soil Service. And there was a reason why I took these tests, and it's not on this slide, but this is the only one that had the greatest amount of variability on the farm. Some of you say, well, his soils look pretty good. He's got a lot of 3s, a couple 2s. I got a lot of 1s. We're talking about Southern Illinois now. And let's go over to phosphorus. Well, his average was 51, so he's just below average for the average. But look, I've got number 1, number 4, and number 10 are all way high, twice as high. So what does that mean to me? Well, that tells me if I wanted to do a good job of fertility on this, I would use a nutrient management plan where I turned around and decided that I was not going to fertilize these 2 right here, 3 here. I'm going to go to variable rate. Now my average is at 47, so I'm getting closer to the bottom. So I take my, say, projected yields of 64, figure it all out. It comes out to 71.75. In other words, almost $75 an acre to put on fertilizer just for my yield. If I turn around here and say, well, those are 2.5 acre grids, 3 of them, makes 7.5 acres. That at 71.74, that's $538 if I go to a variable rate where those 3 spots don't get anything. And the variable rate amounts to an extra $1.50 an acre. That's locally, so that's $37 for the 25 acres. It's going to be spread on those 10 sites. So I save $500, or I could use that to build up my P-test if I wanted to apply it. How many of you are using variable rate technology at this time for P and K? Very good. If you're not, you better check your soils, and this gives you a chance. Okay, what's going on from there? Now I wanted to compare some things because I said, telling you, don't till. No till, yes. Tillage, no. All right, with that then, we've got a couple points here I want to make. Here's that great big thing running behind that 4-wheel drive tractor that just chops everything up. And he comes back in and you put it on with a field cultivation in the spring to level it, and you plant it. that cost is going to be $43, $44 an acre. If I go up here and put on a cover crop, that's basically, that cover crop, that's 1 bushel of cereal rye. I come back in to drill it. I use the same planter. That comes to $48. There's only a $4 difference in there. A $4 difference using this program to go out and reach in between those clay sheets in those clay minerals and grab out phosphorus. Because with no tillage here on the right hand side, then I'm going to have more opportunity for mycorrhizae fungi to be taking place. Okay, last and least, but it's a nutrient loss reduction strategy before we go today. I want just a couple points on it. One, I'm the only farmer on the committee. Yeah. There's about 50 now on the working policy group. I'm the only farmer. A lot of those people are not anybody else but either sewage plant from cities, environmental groups, or ag representatives. And I think my job's going to get pretty big. Here's what if you've been to any of the Farm Bureau meetings, for roadshow meetings, this is what you're asked to do. And I'm going to work only on phosphorus today. Look what you can do. This line right here, this is our percent of reduction from the baseline that we're looking to get to, compared to. If we go to no-till, we get a 5% reduction in phosphorus. We've got to have that 20% reduction by 25. If we want to go to nutrient management planning, we get another 5% reduction. We go to cover crops, that's 12. We're meeting our goal, aren't we, in those 3 practices. And if we really want to throw some people that we really care, we go out and put filter strips along all areas that need them, along creeks and streams. And we've met the 10-year goal easily. But today, I asked you to do some of those things. I said, stop tilling, do nutrient management, get in cover crops for the mycorrhizae, and we'll make the difference. These are the things that we can do. The big thing that we want with the cover crop is we want to stop erosion, but I want to emphasize to you, at high levels of phosphorus in the soil, you're losing soluble phosphorus as well. And I've had one, did some soil sampling this year, and I found out I've got one field that's got way too much phosphorus in it, and it's literally going out the tile line. I took one sample past spring, and I was 3 times the legal limit from hog manure. And you know that hog farmer up there that put on my ground? See those 3 fingers pointing back at me? They count for the guy who didn't do a good job of reading his soil tests, who didn't realize how much the hog farmer was putting on, and he puts them on himself in the same field. And maybe just plain stupidity or not care enough. So I'm not going to point at anybody because I got 3 pointing fingers that point back at me. But the erosion is not going to be there with cover crops. We're going to break up that raindrop splash. We're going to have better root and absorption. And so that's my message. If we want to get phosphorus to stay in the soil, we stop erosion and we do a good job of getting cover crops, no-till, getting mycorrhizae involved. How many have heard of mycorrhizae? Okay. They're the key one for us, and it's a new term for you. Okay, I'm going to say thank you and give you any questions. For as tough as it's going, I mean, I had only 3 times to throw an eraser if I'd had an eraser. There was a lot of yawns, but there wasn't. Only one guy broke his neck, and no, I'm teasing that. Anybody have a question? With that, thank you very much.